From group baths to the many uses of urine, stay tuned to number 1 to find out the most insane makeup ingredients. Number 10. Medieval bathing. Medieval cleanliness was quite different from what we know it as today, and stories of people bathing vary from anything like once a week to once a year. Luckily, the washing of hands and face was pretty regular, but full-body bathing was much less common, as in once every few days at the best, which I guess doesn't sound so bad until you consider a few other things about the time. For example, only the rich could afford to have fires made under their baths to warm the water. So this means that in the winter, bathing was highly uncommon in households that could not afford to heat the water, and as such, bathing was often put on hold for the entire winter period. Then, once a poorer household did decide to bathe, it was a real family occasion, as in, the family would invite some other members of the extended family, such as aunts and uncles, to come around and bathe with them. This may sound interesting until you realize that the entire family would bathe in sequence, but sharing the same water. Oh, and the man of the household would be the first to enjoy the clean water, followed by his sons and the other men of the family. Lastly, the women would have their bath once everyone else was done. Number 9. Toilet paper. Toilet paper is something we take for granted every day, and you may not know or want to think of what was actually used before its invention. There is no easy way to put this, but most of the time they would have to wipe with either leaves, hopefully fresh and soft leaves and not old crispy ones, or their very own hands. Of course, people would preferably use leaves over body parts, but we have all had those days where we get caught without any of the soft paper savior, and although we hopefully always have a backup roll nearby, that was not always the case in the old days, which is where their hand would come into play. In fact, in some cultures, even to this day, people won't shake hands with their left hand, which originates from people using their non-dominant hand to do the deed. This, of course, causes it to be seen as dirty and an insult to shake with. As far as left-handed people are concerned, maybe they would shake with their right hand anyway, and it would just be an inside joke to them, knowing where it had been. Number 8. Utensils. This doesn't sound like such a bad thing at first glance, and there are cultures that, even today, still eat with their hands. The difference, of course, is that modern cultures abide by the general hygiene rules of modern society. Hands are washed before and after eating, so whatever dirt is clinging to your hands is removed before eating, and leftover food particles are washed or wiped off afterwards. So it is at this point that we will remind you that personal hygiene was not the same several hundred years ago. We will also remind you that while their face and hands were washed more regularly than their bodies, it could still be several days between washes, and they would eat probably 1 or 2 meals a day, which wouldn't just be bread, but could also include turkey legs or slabs of meat and stews. Also, leaving you with one final note, I'll remind you what they just used for their bathroom etiquette. Number 7. The groom of the stool. Wait, the what of the what? Well, if you were a teenage boy born to servant parents a few hundred years ago, your future would probably seem pretty bleak. You would probably expect to be a servant boy, tending to the royalties' every need for the rest of your life. That is, unless you were chosen to be the groom of the stool. This strangely named job was one of the most coveted opportunities among servant children everywhere, and any who were selected were the envy of all the other boys. This must sound great until you realize exactly what this job entailed. Delicately put, you would carry around the king's portable and padded box that he used for his bathroom breaks. And when he was finished doing his thing, you would be responsible for wiping him clean. Not with leaves or your hand at least, but with rags that you would carry around with you. So far it doesn't sound like a great job, or too hygienic for that matter, but the groom of the stool boy would often become one of the king's most trusted people and would often be consulted on matters of the kingdom, until eventually he would be promoted to a more prominent place in the castle. In fact, most of the time they would eventually be knighted and even married off to wealthy families in other kingdoms. So, silver lining. Number 6. Medieval detergent. Urine is not used for much these days, unless of course you're Bear Grylls and you're stuck in the wilderness again. But as it turns out, it has many useful properties, or at least it did a few hundred years ago. We'll get to all those in a second. For now, what you need to know is that people rarely washed their clothes back in the day. So if you think it's funny that your favorite cartoon or anime character is always wearing the same clothes in every episode, it was actually a norm for people to wear the same clothes for months on end, peasants and royalty alike. The problem was that the majority of the clothing was made from wool, which took too long to dry for them to wash it, so they just didn't. Undershirts and undergarments were washed, however. But since this was the Middle Ages and most people didn't have access to anything like a detergent, they had a great solution: wash your clothes in urine. Now, this sounds like a terrible idea, but it's surprisingly effective due to urine being high in ammonia, which is great for stain removal. How they discovered this, we don't really want to know, but they would leave large buckets in strategic locations where locals could turn up and add their own liquids to the bucket. To be fair, the urine was at least diluted before use, but I still wouldn't want to stand next to anybody that just had their clothes cleaned that way. Number 5. MultiPurpose Urine. Well, we already know that urine was used as medieval detergent, but unfortunately that's not where it ends. As it turns out, we are heavily underusing it in these modern times, and simply flushing it away is actually a waste of a pretty good product. Just look at these practical uses for it. It can be used to brighten your smile. Really. The Romans, who were also thought to be responsible for first using it as detergent, discovered that if you left urine somewhere to dry, it reduces into a powdered ammonia, which, as mentioned previously, is a great stain remover. Well, now we learn that people would use it to brush their teeth to keep them pearly white. Again, I would not like to know how they discovered this, but at least their teeth were bright. Not too sure about their breath though. It was used to wash your face. It turns out that the Romans again had another trick up their sleeve and another use for the urine. They believed that it cleansed the face and kept them looking youthful with clear skin. Amazingly, again, they were not wrong, as the ammonia in urine would also help in cleansing the pores. I guess this means that if you're tired of buying expensive facial products, you have an extremely cost-effective method built into your body. Maybe at Zero to Hero we'll start doing some makeup tutorials next. You should click on that subscribe button below and follow us for our next skincare tips. Okay, so that may not be our greatest idea, but we still want you to subscribe. Number 4. Mouse skin eyebrows. In our next makeup lesson, modern-day makeup may contain some sketchy ingredients that we are probably better off not knowing about. But in the 1700s, the women of the time had a different sort of problem. Their makeup would cause their hair and even their teeth to fall out. They might not have known it at the time, but their makeup was actually poisoning them. And the cause of it? Lead-based ingredients. These days, we know that lead has no place on the human face, as it is toxic to our skin and can cause all kinds of side effects. Well, the best example of this is the women from the 16th century who had the regular problem of their eyebrows falling out. Not as huge of a problem now, because women just draw on new eyebrows. But back then, they had a very different solution. They would capture and kill mice, cut their pelt into the shape that they wanted, and then they glued them onto their face. And this interesting fashion statement wasn't just one or two women either. It became a huge trend. Women set traps, hoping to catch mice so that they might have eyebrows for an upcoming event. There's even mention of eyebrows falling off their faces while at these events, and them having to try and stick them back on without anybody noticing. What are your thoughts on mouse skin eyebrows? Should we bring back the trend? Let us know in the comments below. Number 3. Multitalented Barber. So far, most of the entries on this list have been on personal hygiene, so it is time to take a step back for a second and look at hygiene on a different scale. Most of us have been to barbers or hairdressers at some point in our life. Well, back in medieval times, a trip to the barber wasn't just for a haircut. As it turns out, barbers were used for far more than just keeping your hair short. In fact, they were essentially used for just about anything. Not even called barbers, but rather barber surgeons. They were extremely common, and actually medical physicians were rarely used at all. Whether it be for a simple tooth pulling to the treating of major wounds and amputations, barbers would handle them all. Which might not seem so bad, unless you consider the devastating mortality rate. Barber surgeons were well known for using leeches as a bloodletting technique on their patients, and in case there's confusion, bloodletting is exactly what it sounds like. They would let leeches suck out the patient's blood, believing that the stagnant disease-filled blood needs to be drained in order to assist in recovery. What this meant was that any trip to the barber was a disgusting affair, with blood everywhere and disease-ridden rodents roaming free. Unless, of course, they caught them for those eyebrows already. Number 2. Surgical tool sanitization. While we're on the topic of barber surgeons, and since we've already mentioned their unorthodox methods of treatment, there was one more reason that they were not the most sanitary doctors to visit. Surgical tools were not sanitized at all, which, as you might guess, is not ideal, especially when you're dealing with anything from tooth pulling to amputations. The connection between dirty tools and infection had not yet been discovered, and as you might realize, those who survived the leeches and bloodletting would often get disastrous infections from the dirty equipment. This would often mean that those who survived after the initial barber visit would fall ill from the infection and have to return for another round of barber-surgeon roulette, assuming that they didn't die from the infection before that. With that said, when equipment was cleaned, it was done so with the most popular cleaning material of the time: good old multi-purpose urine. As you might have guessed, although the urine may have helped to sterilize the equipment to some extent, urine is still full of bacteria, meaning that your choices were essentially infection from dirty equipment or infection from urine-soaked equipment. Seriously though, how we've managed to survive the Middle Ages will probably be one of life's major mysteries. Number 1. Home cleanliness. This might not come as a huge surprise when you consider how they treated their personal hygiene, but home cleanliness may be worse than you were expecting. The poorest people put straw on the floor of their homes, believing that having straw on the floor of your home would keep it clean and fresh. But what it actually did was become extremely good at catching whatever nastiness had accumulated on the floors. It was also very good at hiding the mice and other small rodents that scavenged the food scraps hidden within the straw. This often caused homes to become overridden with rodents and even caused the straw to become a hotbed for disease. The straw had to be changed on an annual basis due to the residents not being able to withstand the stench coming up from their awesome flooring material. The unfortunate thing is that people could not even find some peace in their beds, as they themselves were hardly ever properly cleaned. The same could be said as their homes. Bedding would not be washed and would attract small mites, which would infest their beds. Even the roofs would be made from straw, which would eventually lose its waterproofing as well as its bird-dropping catching abilities, meaning that entire houses, and often even beds, can suffer from dampness. All of this nastiness is now known to have caused chest infections, as well as the general diseases that can be found in bird droppings. Granted, this typically only impacted the poorer citizens, but even castles and homes of the rich were overridden with mice and mites. Tell us your thoughts on how we survived this long as a race in the comments below, and take care.